Good morning, everyone. We are live for today's Learn Watercolor the Heart-Led Way live lesson. I want to welcome all of my Learn Heart-Led students, as well as our Fearless Artist community members. It's just been neat sitting here watching the chat because as we're waiting for the video to start, I see everyone talking back and forth, and as we get to know each other, we get to ask more specific questions about people and how they're doing. Robin had a gala event she was talking about. Sarah homeschools her kids, and we were talking a little bit about homeschooling. So that, stuff like that, it's just fun to be able to connect. And as we get to know each other through the Fearless Artist community, that foundation grows even more. I have a few students that I've met personally here in the community, and so then we know a little bit about each other, and that's really why we created the Fearless Artist community. What I found is in last year, actually it was almost 2 years ago when I first started thinking about creating a community site. And the reason I did that was because in 5 years of teaching watercolor online, I'd made so many wonderful friends. And I really believe that watercolor people are the best people, kind people, generous people, people who we're not into putting on a show. We're authentic and caring. And I got to make all these friends, but I wanted you to have the chance to meet each other. And so as the Fearless Artist community was created last year, we've started to see that happen over the last few months. And that's just been really powerful. It's profoundly humbling to be able to be a part of that and see how, as artists, we can connect with this medium called watercolor, but we also get to connect as human beings. And that's just super exciting. It really is the fulfillment of my dream to have you all get to know each other and fill our need, I think, for that human connection. It's really the internet used in the very best way. And so, yay, we're part of that, and it's really exciting. So Nancy comments, this community keeps me from feeling isolated, and you are all great. Yeah, I feel the same way. I sat down with my local watercolor society on Saturday. We're actually just 7 members from different towns in this region. And we don't see each other very often because we all live in different towns. And so the one fellow sat down and he said, and after we just talked for 10 minutes, and we rambled. It was the nature of art and watercolor supplies. And he says, I've really needed this. I don't have this in my community. And so, yeah, we get to fill that need for each other, and that's pretty cool. So we're here today as a community and as fellow watercolor learners, and we've been in the Fearless Artist community posting work from Learn Watercolor the Heart-Led Way, and I'm going to show off some of our students' work here in just a moment. You can see in the description below the video, there's a link to the show notes. If you want to just take a look at the notes that I'm using to help me keep track of what we're talking about in this lesson and the lesson I want to teach. And there's also a link to a reference photo that I'm going to be loosely using. You're all at different levels in your journey, and I really want to encourage you not to compare your work to the work of other students in the community. Our goal here, and my goal as an instructor, has never been to make carbon copies of me. What is most satisfying for you is going to be painting your most authentic work that connects with your passions, with your deep-seated interests in who you are. It's just like everybody has kind of a different sense of humor. There's different things that make us laugh, and I love a good pun, and I have a friend who absolutely hates puns. We have different ideas of what's funny. That's why sometimes someone will recommend a funny movie to you and you don't laugh once through the whole thing. Yeah, it's personal, and we understand that when it comes to those personality traits. We don't always understand it when it comes to art. We like our sense of humor. I like laughing at the things that make me laugh. And I also like my own creativity. When I'm able to let it out and be that most natural me on my paintings, I'm deeply satisfied in my work, and I know that for you too. So what you're seeking in your art to be fulfilling gets to be found when you allow yourself to exist on your paper. And that is really a mindset transformation. That's why I'm doing so much talking about mindset in the course and in these online live sessions. And so we think about not just how we're painting, but what we're thinking as we're painting, how we come to the studio and prepare to paint. All of those things shape what's going to happen on the paper and how we're going to feel about it. One thing I really liked seeing today, this week, as I looked into the community, was those of you who took a second look at your art after that first painting session, and often art that you weren't happy with. In fact, I even have one that a student pulled right out of the garbage can and painted on again. Was a piece that you thought was straight for the bin, and here there ended up being some promise in it. And seeing that happen, when you realize that your first impression of your work is often not a lasting impression, that can be really helpful in this creative process. Sometimes we just get too close. So allow yourself to take that time to step back from the work, to detach a little bit, and to come back to it as an outside observer. And often you'll see things you didn't notice when you're busy trying to problem solve your way through the painting. So let's take a look at some of our student work. Let's make sure I can switch my screen over. We have a whole bunch of different lessons from, there we go, or paintings that were inspired by lessons in the course. This is Barbara Masser's Sunflower. And Barbara, I really loved the transparency you achieved here. You worked with dilute enough color that the white of the paper shows through and gives us that glow of light. Yellow, it's interesting because often we think when we're using yellow, that yellow is going to be the best way to get a bright effect on our painting. The best way to get a bright effect in your painting is to allow the paper to show through. The paper is always going to be the lightest value in our painting. So allowing that transparency to happen is going to give you a brighter effect. We get a glow as well because of contrast. So actually the dark areas of the yellow, many beautiful blooms here, create edges that give us petals. And this is really actually quite masterfully done, Barbara. And I don't know how much of it was happy accidents, but I can see that you were in tune enough with what was happening on the paper that you were willing to allow those blooms to happen, to flow, and instead of trying to continually smooth them out, you saw their possibility as petal edges, and you allowed them to live. And I think that's really, really quite beautiful and powerful. Let's see what have we got next. Barry's, this is another sunflower, and another luminous sunflower. And this luminous sunflower is also created through contrast and very strong negative shape. Barry, you have just worked with those strong contours around the petals, and you can see how that brings your petals forward and really makes them glow. Additionally, they're very warm. We've got yellow contrasted with cool blues and greens. And it is often strong contrasts that make our painting most dynamic. One thing I wanted to say about contrast, I was just reading about, often we think we need a strong contrast between light and dark, and here it works really well. But often it's interesting because you don't need strong contrast to have contrast in your paintings. And a really good example of that is paintings by Monet. He worked very much in middle values. And so he doesn't have a lot of really dark near blacks in his painting and a lot of pure whites beside each other. And if you convert his paintings to black and white, you'll see that they're much more subtle, and yet there's still contrast there. So you work with what your preferences are. And there's not a strict rule that says you have to have, you know, really strong dynamic contrasts. It's really all in your personal choice and the effect you want to create. Next one, Jackie. Jackie, we're switching back and forth between skies and sunflowers mostly for these demos today, or for these student works. And Jackie, you were working with skies, and you commented that dividing your paper into thirds, like you did on the right, really was made it easiest for you. And I've seen that in my own works. When I take a bigger piece of paper and divide it, often I feel somehow a little more free to explore my expression on those pieces. Often one turns out kind of stiff, but then I get to be a little, I get to react to something I don't like in one painting by trying out something different in the next one. And so having multiple pieces on the go for me has been really powerful in helping me to do my do my maybe one of my paintings is reserved for the struggle. You know, it's the one where I'm trying stuff and it's not really working. So then I can immediately shift to a different part of the paper or a different sheet of paper and react to that. And often that makes my paintings just turn out a little bit better. It's kind of funny that way. And then you have very subtle changes between each one. And so you get to explore what works and what doesn't. And why it works and doesn't work. In some, we have a little bit of fluidity where we've got color flowing from, like on the left paintings, we see a little bit more color flowing from dark to light in the sky, whereas on the right, you're more exploring the negative shape created by the clouds and how those different shapes give different feelings of movement. And that's, you know, it's interesting, just subtle changes make a big difference. Julie, this was that bin one that we were talking about. Julie pulled this one out of the bin to add that second layer of her branches and marks. And look at how it just makes that little first layer feel finished and feel complete and tell a story. In fact, there's kind of a gray shadow right in the middle of the painting that looks like a mountain right there. I zoomed in way too close. And so we have this feeling of depth and distance just by that addition of that dark contrast. And so I'm so glad you pulled this paper out and threw a little more paint at it. And when I have a painting that's not going well, there's something very freeing about that. If I feel like this painting I'm working on is going to go straight into the garbage can, nothing's turning out, that gives me permission to learn everything I can from that piece of paper. And that means throwing more paint at it. That means pushing my boundaries and going further than I maybe thought that I could go. Being willing to take some risks because, you know, I've got nothing to lose. And so I often like it when I have a painting that's at that nothing to lose stage. I learn so much when I keep putting paint on the paper. I make that paper worth every penny from what it has by just using it and seeing what it has to teach me. Next one, Kathy Schemmel's doing the 4 painting exercise. And this is again working with really strong contrast. And Kathy's also exploring contour and line. And we're seeing how this is actually, I don't know how, I want to say that this is actually a form of negative painting, even though she's using mostly line to create shapes. There is an aspect of negative painting, and we're going to talk about that a little later in the lesson today. Learning this kind of just drawing out the shapes is a way of learning to see possibilities in those first layers. And that's really a big part of what this particular exercise is all about, is just teaching us to see and draw out that potential in our paintings. Carrie, this one, I wanted to share this one, Carrie, because if I could, this would have been a great lesson on negative painting for this course. And Carrie commented that she actually painted this before the course, so I can't take credit for this, but I wanted to share it because it is beautiful and because it is such a great example of negative painting. Carrie's description was she started with a first layer, wet and wet, soft, pale colors, and then she used a paper butterfly cutout. I don't know if it was paper or cardstock or plastic butterfly shapes, but she used those different shapes and painted around them and then kept layering. So the lightest shapes would be the ones she did first, And then she just kept painting around and building up those depths, and with really beautiful result. And it is a really good way of developing your negative painting skills. Take that template, maybe it's a leaf, maybe it's a flower, maybe it's a butterfly. You can choose, you can cut it out of cardstock and make your own, or you can use stencils, and painting around and building up those shapes, a good way to see those depths start to come to life. And yeah, so beautifully done, Carrie. What a great example and idea for anyone who's wanting to build up their negative painting skills. Take a look at her painting in the community, and she's got a little description of how she did it there. I had to share this one as well from Carrie, and usually I don't share two from one student, but I wanted to share this because we see down below a painting of a flower, a cosmos flower, done in one of Anna Mason's tutorials. And Anna Mason, you've probably heard of her. She's well known for painting very realistic subjects, often single objects like this, a strawberry, a flower, and great control and detail. And then we have something from my tutorial, loose and fluid sunflowers and wet and wet. And I wanted to show this because Carrie's wise in exploring both of these styles of watercolor. If your comfort zone, and often I get students here who have been painting in extensive detail in realism, and they're feeling like they want to go looser, but to go wet and wet and paint really fluidly like this can be a struggle. It can feel very foreign. But I believe that if you're taking time to do loose warm-ups, wet and wet explorations, splash the paint around, and then go back to your realistic style, that is okay. Painting loosely in a warm-up is going to help you to bring that looseness into your more realistic paintings. It's going to help you find the balance that fits for you. There are elements of looseness that can go into realistic painting. Maybe you do a wet and wet underpainting before you do the detail stuff. You decide how detailed you're going to go. But letting the watercolor flow, it connects us to our love of watercolor. It helps us to invite a little bit of freedom and flow into our paintings. And where you take it from there is completely up to you. Moving on, this was Laura's, and Laura, you commented that you weren't sure if this was negative painting or not. It kind of, I think you said it kind of got away on you, and I don't know why it has to zoom in that close. There we go. What happened here is Laura did her first wet and wet wash, and then she started pulling out negative shapes. And this actually is negative painting, and yet it's also very different than it's a different way of approaching negative painting because you've used all one color, and yet you've created shapes and you've created depth. It's got a little bit of an abstract quality to it that's really interesting. I like that you were willing to take it to this place, even though it wasn't what you had planned. And you are growing your negative painting skills. Don't worry about that. You're teaching yourself to see. I feel like negative painting often gets us a little turned around in the whole process. We start with this idea of what we're doing, and then we get a little lost. And we're going to address that in the painting part of this lesson. So yeah, we're going to go there in a little bit. So if you're feeling like your negative painting got a little out of control, please know you're not alone. And that's okay. It's to be expected. This one is another exercise in negative painting by Linda Anderson. Linda, you've got really beautiful velvety rich colors here because you've worked with multiple layers. And we get that beautiful velvety effect when we're willing to kind of build up layers in watercolor, and it gives us gorgeous depths. The yellow and blue are a really nice complement to each other. And you can see her negative painting working to define the petals as well as to help the sunflower to pop forward from the background. So we've got negative painting in the navy blue around the, we never see navy blue in watercolor, in the indigo around the petals. And we've also got negative painting with the petals themselves, with the darker value of yellow that defines the petals, and the warmth of the reds that define the petals as well. So that's something to look for as you work on your negative painting. Marla, you shared this one, and I thought it was a beautiful example of the other topic we're going to address in our painting today, and that is focal point painting. Thinking about how the viewer explores your painting and how they travel through the scene. You have actually a lot of negative painting in the petals of the flowers themselves. Let's just look at them a little closer. You've defined some of those flowers, and it's given us the depths. It's given us light and dark. Actually, we see negative painting, a darker background around paler flowers. We also see darker flowers with a paler background. So we have both negative and positive approach to depicting those blossoms, which is a really good way of using negative painting. It's not the whole painting, it's just part of it. And then we see just a lovely softness in the vase, and that helps it not to take over from the rest of the scene, which I think is really beautiful. So beautifully done, Marla. I can see it's not your first time painting that subject. This one is Melanie's, and it's turned sideways, but I think we can still enjoy it. More negative painting with some softness in the background, and defining those petals. You've got the layer of smaller petals in kind of a rose color, and then the yellow larger ones defined as well. And that's all negative painting. Nicole posted this one. This is from a sky exploration. Just that beautiful edges that really keep our eye up at the top of the page and make the sky our point of interest. You know, the lower half we see looks like water. There's even a bit of a line that could be hills in the far distance. And yet the eye just keeps going back to the watermarks in the clouds. And there's actually really crisp edges where you had wet paint on dry paper, and then we've got the beautiful watermarks where the water was pushing into the drying wash and creating a little bit of a softer edge. So we've got huge variety in edges here that's just really pretty. Doesn't have to be complicated to be beautiful. Let's see here, two more. Another negative painting. This is Penny's. Penny working with her greens to help her pinks pop forward. And that's working with complementary color. There's also some lighter areas there too. And Penny, you said you felt like you struggled, but I actually think this works really well for creating those shapes, helping your flower to kind of own the painting, giving us the interplay between light and dark values as well. Again, it doesn't have to be complicated to be beautiful. And finally, this one is Sandra's. Sandra working with skies again and being willing to go bold. And you mentioned, I think, Sandra, that you felt like you might have been a little heavy-handed with your values. But I think I'd almost rather students chose a too bold stroke than one that's too timid. You can back up from being too bold, but it's really hard to be bolder. You know, it's easier, I think, to rein in than to really push yourself out there if your habit has been to hold back. So, you know, make it your practice to make some risky choices, and then you can always decide if they're too risky and you're really out of your comfort zone. You know, you can work on finding that happy medium. But I love a good risk. Those elements of surprise are actually what I want to talk about next. So let me just switch the camera over. I wanted to share a quote with you, and let me just find it here. Carrie posted this in our community, and I wanted to share it. Carrie said, "I just had a stunning revelation into myself. I had not particularly liked my sunflower play, and I thought it dark with only a few redeeming points. I look at it now only an hour later, and I like it. My revelation is this: when I didn't like it, it was because it was not what I had envisioned and what I was expecting or hoping for. Looking at it without those expectations, just as is, I like it, quite a bit in fact. I am still frustrated and need to practice and learn how to achieve some of the techniques that frustrate me. Thus, the play, experiment, while keeping in mind what I have just learned about myself." And I agree. I think expectations are really killer. This is why sometimes we have a better time, and I was just thinking, I have a better day when I'm not expecting to have a great day. Maybe it's supposed to be just an average day, but I look I look for things to celebrate and enjoy about that day. Whereas, sometimes I don't know, my birthday's coming up, so I think about birthdays. Sometimes birthdays can really suck because we have expectations that we're going to have a great day, and then it doesn't quite meet our expectations. And paintings are the same way. We have a vision in our head, and we're trying and trying to match that vision without recognizing the beautiful things that are already happening, without us trying to force our vision onto the painting. So there's that balance. And that leads me to a big question, and that is it really creativity if our painting goes exactly as we've planned? And I'm asking this because I heard a quote. I'm trying to remember if I mentioned it in our course here. I heard a quote from another artist, and he commented that he wasn't sure that the urban sketching craze was really art. He's like, it's competent depiction of your scene if you're sitting there and you can competently, sketch what you can see. But if it doesn't cost you anything in terms of self-expression and sharing your personality through your paintings and what personally engages you, is it really art? And so I wanted to ask you that question. How creative are we if we are taking a vision in our head and our only goal is to make our painting look exactly like that plan? Is it how necessary is the unexpected, the element of surprise to our creative process? And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on that. I'm going to wait a little bit because the video is about 20 seconds ahead of your chat here. Pam says, I do best when I'm surprised. Just waiting for your answers. I'm curious. Do you feel like you're open to the possibility of surprise in your paintings? I'm looking back at my art, and the ones where I plunge in and am willing to kind of pivot with the painting are the ones that feel most genuine and authentic for me. So those are my thoughts, and yeah, that's just something I've been pondering lately. I want to invite risk. Now, Nancy says, does it depend on if we are painting for a specific viewer? So there's that. If you're painting a commission, for example, for someone who's asked you to paint a specific subject, does it feel creative? And I personally, I've struggled with commissions because painting something for someone else means I'm trying to fit their expectations, and that's even harder than trying to meet my own expectations. Chuck says, I like the unexpected because I get it often. True. Pam says, I felt like my creativity was sucked out of me when I was commissioned to do two paintings for a very particular client. Michelle says, daily I'm open to surprise, but I think painting an urban landscape is still art. Yes, I think this whole debate on what is art and what isn't is a huge debate, and I don't think there's any way to solve it. And I think it's very dangerous to tell somebody that what they're making is not art. I think art is, for me, I've ended up defining art as bringing ideas to life. And that's what we're doing when we paint. And that's anytime we're inviting the personal into what we're doing, what we're creating, I think we're making art, whether we see it or not. And Carl says, doesn't this statement render centuries of artists as hacks and shams? Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the one reason that Mike's quote resonated with me so much, or not resonated, but it stuck with me, was that it was such a bold thing to say, and it was critical of the vast quantity of art that we see out there. So it's like, wow, that's quite a thing to say. I like that it was an inflammatory thing to say because it really made me think. And so, I didn't have to agree with it to bring it, to invite it in and to chew on it for a while. So there's a thought. Helen says, so let's talk about that. Helen says, for me, creativity is being open. And when I let the painting, oh, I lost your quote. I let the painting inform me for my next move. That's my take. So I love that openness. And I have teenagers, and I see that when I'm talking about stuff with them, when I'm talking about life with them, sometimes they're open and we have this great conversation, and sometimes they're resistant. And anything I say is going to be like talking to a brick wall. And so, I can choose to try to get through to them. But if you're resistant, it's probably not going to work. And I feel like that in my painting as well. Am I resistant or am I open? And so that's why we talk about doing warm-ups, is wanting to get to that state of openness. Let's take a look here. T says the paintings that become as they develop. So they come, they get their own identity as they develop, and I'm working intuitively, are my personal favorites. Carrie says if what you're doing is bringing you joy and happiness, you are being creative. That's another interesting debate. Does creativity always have to bring joy? That's something else to think about. Angela says, surprise on how it comes out is always fun. My husband always surprises me with his analysis of what he sees from my art. And I like that we get to invite other people in to their takes on art. We're not telling them what to do, but we might be asking them, what do you think? What do you see? There's no wrong answer. Kathleen says, this is the key reason I'm enrolled in this course. Currently, I'm only comfortable copying other artists. I'm painting, but it's not really art at all. You want to bring your own self into the painting, and that's when it becomes your art. And it's a hard thing to teach. It takes you being willing to engage with me, you being in a state of openness so that you're thinking about what you want to bring to the table. And you're trusting that you can bring great things to the table. And I trust that you can bring great things to the table. Each of us has our own unique voice to share. Shelley says, as a newer painter who never thought I was creative, it's always a surprise. And I think anyone who puts pencil, paintbrush, etc. to paper is not duplicating, but expressing. And it is true. It's very hard to not bring something of yourself into your painting. And we want to just keep encouraging ourselves to do that more. And great comments here. Great discussion. I can't read every piece. Jan says, I know I look forward to returning to the dry art the next morning. Happy surprises. Usually I try not to be too critical of my effort. And that's one thing I wanted to say. We need to go do some painting, so we need to switch gears here. But just one last thing to say about this is non-judgmental. I think, Barry, you commented that you felt a sense of fear as you painted. You were afraid to, you're not the only one. We all feel that. We're worried we're going to mess up. And it's like, where is this fear coming from? No one is going to, tear the brush out of our hand and refuse to allow us to ever paint again if we make a bad painting. No one is going to throw us in jail for doing a painting that didn't turn out, art jail. But yet somehow we live with this fear. And I used to feel, and I think this is where it comes from, is we have this sense that our bad paintings, our failed paintings, the ones that didn't turn out like we expected, they're judging us, they're judgments on whether or not we are actually artists. Your painting is not judging you. One thing that's really helped me is to recognize that the stacks and stacks of paintings that I have that haven't turned out, and I'm sitting beside dozens of them here in my studio cabinets. They're my development pieces. They're the ones that taught me how to paint the ones that I got to frame and hang on the wall. So really really recognize that we do have this fear of judgment. We have this sense of shame often when our paintings don't turn out, and it's groundless. It's painting from that place of non-judgment is a choice we have to make. We have to recognize that fear of judgment is not something with any substance. We put a lot of weight on it, but it really doesn't need to be, because what's going to happen if we paint a bad painting? It's a piece of paper. And paper's purpose is to be filled. It's not necessarily to be a masterpiece, but paper's made to be filled with color, and so we get to do that. So let's do that over here. I'm going to switch my work surface over. I am going to quickly take a look at my notes and make sure I haven't missed anything important. But yeah, just something to be thinking about as you think about where you're, about the role of creativity and surprise in your paintings. Do feel willing to invite surprise, to allow your painting to pivot and turn into the unexpected, and we go from there. Now I want to show you my reference photo today, and then we're going to talk about focal point painting. There we go. Okay, so this is my, this is my wonderful tree in Ireland. I've painted it a few times actually, and I think this is when we were down in Kerry. Just this lovely little path, and I took a photo of this tree and the path, and I thought it would be a great photo to use as loose inspiration for a painting of that focuses on the focal point. And I'm not sure if focal point is actually the right description, because what we're talking about is painting, thinking first and foremost about how the viewer experiences the painting. And what I really should have done is plan to have some examples here of paintings where I've done this. I might have one close by actually. Let me see. Okay, this is a painting I did in a previous lesson. Actually, you can see it if you look it through my archives in the Fearless Artist community. It's one I think that I did in one of our live lessons. Now, when we look at a painting, and every painting we look at, most people are going to experience it in very much the same way. Our eye is going to take a route through the painting, and that route is going to be dependent on the shapes on the page. If we're staring at a blank piece of paper, which that one's not blank on the back side, if we're staring at a blank piece of paper, there's nowhere for the eye to go. And so we glance at it and we walk away. But as soon as we put a mark on the page, that was the world's palest mark, but even that pale little mark, the eye is going to go there. And for some reason my phone is ringing. Hang on a sec. I'm sorry, that was very strange. Usually my intercom from the house only goes when people are in the house. Okay, so as I was saying, as soon as we put a mark on the page, that is where the eye goes. And every mark after that is going to influence which where our eye goes first. So I can place another mark on the page, and it's a smaller mark, but it's a darker mark. And now there's 3. So where does my eye go? Probably, looking at this painting, I'm still going to go to the orange mark because it's a different color. And so we end up with this hierarchy of shapes. So now I've got this blue shape is larger. Maybe I make a line. That's going to influence where my eye goes and how I move through the painting. Everything I do with my brush influences the painting. And how much impact I give it is going to have a lot to say about when I look at it and for how long. And we use these tools, and this is very, very random, and yet it's interesting because we can make all these random marks, and yet most people, when they look at your painting, they're going to look at it in the same way. They're probably going to go to either the darkest shape or the largest shape first, bam, and then their eye's going to move around following this hierarchy of shape and line and contrast, and all of those things influence how you move through the painting. For this painting, how does your eye move through this painting? What do we see? We've got some very strong dark shapes. We've got contrast. We've got different colors that can influence how you move through the scene. So where do we go first? And I really feel like my eye goes right up to here. First of all, we flow and we almost feel that movement, that curve of the water. That water is where I have got white space in here, little white flecks. I've got this beautiful curving shape that's echoed by this dark curving shape here. We've got all of our strong darks converge in this area as well. So there's a lot of clues here that tell the viewer to move to this part of the painting. And brush marks that pull you along this line, brush marks that pull you up here. Water, actually, there's little blooms and watermarks that move us up here as well. Everything's pointing. I've almost drawn arrows telling the viewer where to look. Arrows that tell you to go this way. Little brush hatch marks that tell you to go this way. And then these vertical strokes, again, are like exclamation points saying, look here. And we've got this lovely blue mountain shape, or purple and blue mountain shape. And it's very beautiful and calm. It kind of echoes the sky. It echoes the water. So everything has this harmony. And then that bright green is like this other pop that, again, brings us to the center of the painting. So we keep, so whenever I look at a painting, and this is something you're going to do, especially if you're coming back to a painting after time away, pay attention to where your eye goes, how you travel through the painting. And if I had placed maybe some of these same strong darks up in the mountains, there possibly would be a tension where the eye wouldn't know where to land, where I'd be bouncing back and forth. So I have actually these beautiful hash marks here that I really like, and they're just from this flat brush that kind of makes this little comey mark, and it's one of my favorite brushes right now. It's just a little flat synthetic made by Da Vinci, and I would give you a link, but I can't find it online. Anyhow, so I like that brush. I like the marks it makes, and I've got them very strong and dark here, and they actually are echoed in my mountain shape here, but in a paler value, which meant that they didn't take over. So my eye still comes to this area of the painting. And so I really like to think about how the viewer goes through the painting. And if you have a painting where you weren't as careful about where the eye should go, there might be that tension where you feel like you're bouncing back and forth between objects. The way to cure that would be to make a choice. Which of those dark marks, or the too big shapes, or what's not harmonious there, which one's going to dominate, make that area a little bit darker, or lighten. Sometimes you might have to even lift and blot a little bit of paint to lighten an area so that it stops trying to demand your attention. And just the main thing to think about here is just where does your eye go and where does it stay? And one way that I find works really well is to paint thinking about my point of interest first. I sometimes use the word focal point painting, but I actually like the quote or the phrase point of interest more, because it's kind of like that. Sure, that's the first thing you look at, but you still want to look at everything else. So we think about the viewer's trip through the painting rather than concentrating on one area. We recognize that they want to look at everything in the painting, but then we want them to keep coming back to one main area. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about as I paint here. You might recognize this background because it was one of my skies from last week, and I decided it's soft enough that I can build up color on it. With focal point paintings, sometimes you might start with white paper and work outward, but you can work with a first layer like this and then build out. So we're going to do that today. And I'm going to work with the colors in my little Daniel Smith palette again. And let's see here. I want a neutral, so I'm mixing my three primaries, my Quin Gold, my Phthalo Blue, and my Quin Rose, I think it's Quin Rose. And I want kind of a purpley gray maybe, so I'm going to keep adding a little more blue and red than yellow. And maybe I'll add a little bit of this verditer blue too. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start with our tree, and just using, this would be a positive painting because I'm putting a dark shape over top of lighter shapes, and we're just going to draw out some of that gray. And I'm using the kind of diagonal stroke from the sky that I painted last week to support my tree and serve as a basis, a foundational shape here. And I put that first stroke down quite dark, and then I'm using a damp brush to kind of pull it out. Pull the gray out and lighten it a bit. And suddenly we have something for the viewer to look at. Their eye goes right to our tree because our tree is strong and dark. And so that's really the first way to make your point of interest, is maybe to make it the most defined shape in the painting. I'm just dotting in a little bit of verditer blue in a few spots to make my tree trunk a little more interesting looking. So we've made this a very nice crisp shape. We've also made it the darkest shape. Suddenly it's the most important thing in the painting. And now we have to decide how we're going to support this tree. We want it to be rooted into the ground, so maybe we mix a little green. And I'm just adding some of this green into, I think that was Cascade green. I'm adding it into my gray mix. And I'm actually going to connect it to the tree here so that we remember that the tree is the point of interest. Everything else is supporting the tree. And by working my green grasses out from the tree, I don't even have to carry them right off the page. I can just work around the base of the tree for now. And then I can choose maybe to soften a little bit here. And my tree suddenly looks anchored to the ground because, you know, we've kind of blurred, it doesn't look pasted on. We've kind of blurred its base and rooted it into the grasses there. And I'm going to place a few darks down here. I want the eye to not just go to this darkest branch here, but I want the eye to go look down at the landscape. And so by adding some of my same dark grays down here, now we have this dark gray here is echoed by this dark gray here. We have the eye moving and following those dark shapes. Let's also place some greens for some leaves into our tree. And I want to do that before the tree starts to, the branches dry too much. And I'm using the Cascade green again, but I've mixed it with a little bit of the Quin Gold. And I'm just going to use the side of my brush to create some leaves. And they're kind of a paler value right now. I can build up more darks over top, but if I keep it light and let it blur into the trunk a little bit and the background, I think that'll give my tree some depths and connect all those pieces. And my branches are already drying quite a bit, so it's going to blur a bit. But we can also, I'm also making sure some of those branches are a little bit paler so that I can go a little darker with my green and have some leaves in front of the branches. And sometimes a better way to do it would be to paint those branches as broken lines. You can even use straight up Quin Gold bring a little hint of autumn into the painting maybe. That little pop of warmth is also going to affect our focal point if we've got mostly cool grays in the painting. Adding that orangey splash, doesn't that bring the eye up into the top of the painting all of a sudden? So suddenly, every time I put the brush on the paper, it's affected what the viewer is going to look at. And so we want to keep paying attention to that. That's why I don't spend all my time just painting my leaves right now. I stop, I pull back, and I think about what am I looking at first now? And that is now my eye. If I pull back and look, my eye is going pretty straight to the warmth of the leaves here. So maybe I want to put a little hint of some warmth down below here using that same yellow-green. And because this is still damp, another advantage of painting everything kind of simultaneously, I can actually place those warmer colors into this damp area, and you can see they're flowing really quite beautifully and blending. The crisp lines are always going to be more dominant than soft flowing lines. So, you know, here we have a lot of softness. Here we have edges that we follow along the painting. And so everything I place, again, just a reminder, I'm focused on the focal point, the main part of the painting. Everything else is there to support it. One thing I might want to do, and I would encourage you, if you're trying out focal point painting, keep it simple, but I'm going to go a little bit more complicated here, and I'm going to just hint at some background stuff. So I'm going to use my gray to create a distant tree over here and see if I can get away with it anyhow. So we have distant trees in this painting, or in the reference photo. And we've got all kinds of different distant elements. I just want to hint at the fact that this is not a tree standing on a hill. Maybe there's stuff in the background, and I can do that just with this kind of ghostly shape. And actually, I was going to suggest maybe doing a little bit of negative painting up here, debating whether or not it will work. Let's try it. Problem with negative painting is anytime you're negative painting, you're going darker than the object you're painting around. And I don't want my background to be too dark, but if I paint a dark value up here and then let it dilute as I move down, I think that'll work to create those contours. It's an experiment, so it's worth a try. And for something like this, I am trying to work quite pale, keep my values light. You don't have to go very dark to make your background come to life. And let's carry that shape just across here with just a slight line of distant blurred trees, and suddenly my painting has a little more depth than it had before. And yeah, Jan says distant trees, ghostly shapes make the painting more interesting to me. So yeah, play with that. Because one drawback of this whole focal point idea, working from that main object, main shape, is that you have to paint around your main shape. You know, suddenly the main shape gets in the way a little bit, and so sometimes we try to paint around it, and it ends up looking like our background is cut out because there's little lines and gaps. So I do try to make the background look as seamless as possible while carefully painting around those shapes. Or I just but it also is a good reminder that we want to simplify the background and not put too much detail in. I like adding a little bit of darker value into my tree trunk to give us some character and depth. And adding detail is again a good reminder of, or a good indicator, good clue to show people that they need to look at the focal point, the point of interest. If you've got the most detail in that area, that's going to be their indicator that that is where you want them to spend their time, their most time in the painting, looking at that area of the painting. And so adding some darker line here to give the trunk some texture. And my trunk is mostly dry, a little damp, so there's a little bit of line and a little bit of flow and blurred value, and that's good. That's what I want. Combination of hard and soft edges. And I'm doing it in a hurry. I could take my time and be slower and more intentional. But I want to move on. We've got, actually, I wanted to do a negative painting demo today too before we run out of time. We've got a lot of content. And as I add detail to the edge of the trunk, it's bleeding a little bit into the background. That's actually not the end of the world. I'm going to let it bleed a bit. Sometimes that makes the background and the focal point just connect just a little bit more. We don't really want a pasted on look. I want to put a little bit of line in this branch. The easiest way to reach it is by turning the paper. And I ran out of my gray. Remember that I mentioned last week about mixing and topping up your color. One reason I didn't do that is this just isn't a very good mixing palette. And if I were using it full time, I would probably have a plate as a backup. And then I can decide if I want to build up color in the leaves. I might want to add a few more darks. And I really try to use the side of my brush when I'm painting clusters of leaves so that I don't get locked into wanting to paint every individual leaf, because that is not a good way to paint a loose painting. We want to look for masses of shapes. And then from there, it's just making decisions as to how much detail I want to add. How far do I want to go with this? Maybe I want to add more grasses. Maybe I feel content just making my tree as beautiful as possible. And because the tree is the point of interest, that is the first direction I want to go. I could let this dry, and probably what I would do if I wasn't doing this for a lesson, we had more time, I would let this dry completely and then maybe add even just a few more fine lines to really add depth into my tree trunk. Maybe a little spatter of leaf color on the trees. And I kind of like the simplified lower half. It just keeps bringing the eye back up to this part of the painting. And focal point painting gives you permission to focus on that point of interest, and everything else gets softened. So if you're struggling with wanting to have an equal amount of detail in every part of your painting, this is a really good exercise to help you start to balance out that tendency. Okay, moving on. I wanted to talk about negative painting just a little bit. And we've talked about it a bit. Negative painting is happening here anytime we are painting around a shape to keep the color light and to define that shape. We're negative painting. This is a really good example of negative painting because I've carved around my mountain with my sky. And so my mountain has that nice glow of light. It looks like it has snow on it. If I want to have snow in my painting, I need to paint around the areas that are supposed to be light. And then we decide, and the deal is with negative painting is if you're not using negative painting, if you're painting the shapes by putting paint on those shapes, everything just gets darker and darker and darker. So probably, even if you're feeling overwhelmed by negative painting, you're probably already using negative painting to keep your light values. That's just the way we do it. And so often I think we think about negative painting as being more complicated than it is, because we're trying to use it for the entire painting, and that's not really necessary. The goal is to use it for parts of your painting so that we can keep the light values around certain parts of the painting. For this painting, you know, I just did this quick sketch a few months ago, and it's been in my drawer of unfinished things. A great place to pull out and explore my ability to strengthen my paintings and maybe to paint negatively. We have this green here, and we've got this lovely kind of warm, I think it's a raw sienna. If I were to darken my green, the raw sienna is going to look lighter, and I can create shapes that suggest maybe distant trees and bushes. And I'm actually using this green, I'm actually painting trees in the green while painting around trees in the warmer raw sienna color. And so I'm negative painting and I'm positive painting at the same time. Talk about the ultimate multitasking. But I'm sure you've seen when you've tried to paint objects or shapes, I'm sure you've seen that you often find your painting getting heavier and heavier and darker, even though you're using light colors. Maybe I wanted to paint my, let me see, I'll find my raw sienna here. I like matching the original color whenever I can. It's sometimes hard when you have a painting you put away months ago. I'm not 100% sure it was raw sienna that I used, but it's close enough. I know my colors well enough that I can identify that. So if I were to go with the raw sienna and start painting all across here, I have been able to, you know, I might be able to define this row of trees more, but as I do it, these colors become very similar in value in how dark they are. So now I have this beigey color, tan, and this green. If I were to convert them to black and white, there would be very little difference between them. Whereas in this area, where the raw sienna is and the green is, it's very clear which one is darker of the two. And so that's one reason we want to use negative painting rather than building up more of the same color to help a shape to dominate. I'm just going to use water to bleed this raw sienna and let it flow on the paper. I'm using a little bit of a scrubbing motion with my brush to kind of loosen up that pigment. It wants to cling in place. And then I can use a lot of water and pull that raw sienna across the page a little bit more. So I really do like to think about my values by painting around shapes to help them to pop forward. The same thing with the mountain. If I wanted to make this this edge stand out even more, like there's sunlight landing on that edge of the mountain, let me just reach. I might decide to negative paint around the snow by adding, you know, a shape on this side. And suddenly I've painted a contour on this side that makes that white strip even whiter. I'm not sure it effectively reads as a shadow, but on the other hand, it does serve that successful goal of making that white edge really stand out. And I could go even darker here. And suddenly the eye really goes there because there's just so much contrast. So we use negative painting to create contrast. Now, moving on. I don't know that was the best example, that was an example. Here I have a painting that I started, and you are often in this place where I am. I had a beautiful background that I liked, and this hint of berries. So I started painting the berries, I started painting the leaves, and then I stopped. I haven't finished it. And so it's how do you take this painting to the next level? And this is where negative painting can be your friend. And this is where time is also your friend. Please don't feel like every painting needs to be finished the same day you start it or the same week you start it. Sometimes it takes a few months. And if you're feeling a lack of confidence about negative painting, allowing time to pass while you build up those layers is a really great way to learn it, because you give yourself permission to plan to look for one stroke, and that would be all I would suggest doing. Maybe you come into this painting and you see these berries, you see the leaves, you want the berries to pop, you want the leaves to have some shape and form, you want the background to stay nice and soft, and you don't want to overwork it because that's your tendency. That's my tendency. And that's why I love to allow time to come to a painting with a small plan. Maybe the small plan is to define the contours of these berries so we can see that outline just a little bit better. So I just negative painted. I just took my Quin Rose and I painted along the edge of this berry so that this berry is actually a little bit more in shadow. And I went along the edge of that berry as well. And then I'm just going to soften right out so it fades away and we have an edge just where the berries touch. I'm even going to soften right out to here because I like that kind of disappearing edge right there. So that's just doing one thing, but it's one thing that makes a difference. It's one thing that helps bring this berry more to the foreground. Now maybe I see this shape and it looks kind of like a big leaf to me, and so I also want to define that. So maybe my job for today will be to define that contour, and I'm going to do it with negative painting. So I see this leaf, I want it to pop forward by making the background a little bit darker and defining the shape of that leaf. So I'm just going to paint a curved line. I'm going to paint one side of that one leaf. And that line is going to start to bring this leaf forward. And I'm just going to bleed out this side with a wet brush and let it flow. And whenever I try to bleed out an edge like this, I like to bring that water way further out, often right to the edge of the paper. So I'm going right to here on this side. And I'm going to go further here on this side as well, because wherever that green stops, it will leave a line. And then I can decide, do I want to even go a little darker? Maybe I'll touch the pure phthalo blue right there. Look at how that brings the eye right to that part of the painting. If it's too dark, I can blend it just a little bit more. I can use a damp brush to lift it just a little bit. And suddenly I have this leaf taking shape just a bit more than it was when I started this painting today. And that might be all I do today. You know, often we mess with a negative shape over here and then we think, well, now I need to paint another negative shape over here. See it in your mind's eye before you plunge in. One thing I could do, and I'm just really taking my time. The nice thing about this is it can be done slowly. There's no rush because most of my paper is dry right now. I'm only working in small sections, and so I don't have to hustle. I'm going to add a dark shape right in here that's going to suggest background, and it's going to also help create a little stem, a little leafy stem. And then bleed, soften out that edge. And then I can stop. And then I have something to build on for my next painting. If that feels too dominant, which it kind of does, blot a tiny bit of that color up but I'm using negative painting, and I'm taking my time. I'm really not rushing. And, this can become just an exercise to help you go into that negative painting space. And then if you're doing that, for a couple of minutes every time you paint, I feel like it's easier not to get turned around, because I don't know about you, but when I've been working on negative painting for a while, I start to forget what parts come in front, what parts go behind, and I start finding myself painting the shape rather than painting around the shape. My head just gets turned around. It's like I can only think about negative painting for a short period of time, and then my brain starts to get very literal again. So taking the time to observe and paint just a little has really helped me keep control of my negative painting rather than it controlling me. So I'm hoping that's helping you. I'm hoping that's encouraging you just a little bit as you think about negative painting. It is a small piece of technique, and it has a specific job. It's helping define shape. It's helping keep those light areas light and help those light areas, usually they come forward when we darken the areas around them. So keep that in mind as you're painting. We really try to let go of any feeling of anxiety and any feeling of haste, having to rush. This is about pausing and being in the moment. And that's what T's commenting here. Watercolor has always made me feel rushed because it dries so quickly. Taking my time brings the joy back. Yes. And I think a lot of that is that pause to reflect before you ever start painting. Pause, make your plan, paint as far as your plan was set to go, and then stop and step back again and let that pause work for you in giving your brain time to catch up and and continue that planning. So since I've been recording my lesson here, we've gotten an inch of snow. It's winter wonderland out there once again. I want to thank you for painting with me today. I'm looking forward to seeing your work in the community. Do remember to post it. There's actually a bonus reason for posting in our Fearless Artist community. If you're posting your work or if you're leaving a comment, you get entered into a draw. Every single month we give away prizes to people who are active in the community. We draw from your names and pick one or several, depending on how big our prize is. Every month we try to do something a little different, just to celebrate this whole idea of creating community and engaging with each other. So thank you for being a part of that. As you post, do share your questions and your comments and your frustrations. Share your thought process when you post your paintings. That really helps me to know how to coach you. And I do try to do that, especially for our Learn Heart-led students. That's a part of your interactive course package. And so when you're posting there, I am present and I'm watching and I'm trying to advise and give guidance where I can. So thank you for being here. I wish you well today, and I look forward to seeing your paintings in the community. Bye. Hit my button. Okay, bye for now.